There's a pretty one, Ulysses. There it is.
Hello, BookTube. I'm Shawn the Book Maniac. Welcome back to my channel and another episode of Zooming In, which is I'm not going to call it new anymore. I've been doing it for a few months. An occasional series on my channel where I chat with bookish social media luminaries the world over about articles on bookish, literary, artsy-fartsy publishing topics online. And my very special guest today is Heather Gregg, joining us from Edinburgh. Hello, Heather.
Hello, hi. I must say, I don't think of myself as a luminary, but I've only been on BookTube for a year, but I'm happy to sparkle occasionally.
Well, and I'm the one that gets to designate it. So yes, you are. You are in my eyes, Heather, a
Thank
luminary.
you.
So how fabulous to have you here. And we're going to be talking about an article that's about writing and cooking. And I especially invited Heather because she does a lot, or at least recently she's put up at least two videos that are about cooking and other forms of creativity. And I thought she would be a perfect interlocutor for this article. The article is entitled Brendan Shay Basham on the similarities between the chef life and the writing life. And that was in LitHub in early September. His debut novel came out just before that. He is a member of the Big Water and Folded Arms People Nations, which I believe is part of the Dene Nation. And he's writing about kind of how he got into writing through being a chef. So here we are. And Heather, what did you make of this article?
Well, I noticed all sorts of key things about creativity in it. Some of the sentences are, I wouldn't let my cooks call me chef, which was kind of like how later I only half believed if I introduced myself as a poet or writer, he wrote. And I think a lot of people struggle with that. And recently I was on a plane with a songwriter and he was talking about the difficulty he had in saying, I am a songwriter. And the solution I find to that is saying, I am a writer. If I occasionally write something that sees the light of day, but it's different to say I'm an author. And so there's things like that. Also sentences like communities we built was in the article. And I thought about the whole thing of being in a writing community. Also, of course, the BookTube community is a great space for that. And that there is a similarity between cooking and writing. And do some tutoring in creative writing. And one of the things I talk to my students about is tasting words, because speaking words out loud is really similar to tasting food. You're using your tongue and your throat and your mouth and everything. And we use a word and it becomes something so specific, like an ingredient in a recipe. So I see lots of echoes in the article and creativity and writing.
Well, your preliminary comments have just triggered a massive synesthetic kind of reaction in me. So, how fabulous. Say a bit more about what you do, your work as a creativity instructor, the fingers in all those creative pies, to use another food
Mm.
analogy, Heather.
Yes, that is such a good analogy. I would look upon myself as being an intermediate creator. In my 50s, I've just gone back to university and done a master's in intermediality, which is where you look at all the different art forms and how they're different, separate, and yet together, how they work together, and how there are references between each of them. So that's quite a mixture, a lot of pies, as you say. I would teach creativity, and also I am a creative mentor. So even in that journey where I met the songwriter, I also met a young woman who was knitting and thinking about starting a YouTube video channel on that. And I just encouraged her. I think she's probably going to do it. So I'm looking forward to that coming through. And I've also curated exhibitions. I've had my poetry published in anthologies. And I am working on making audio guides for art exhibitions. So all the arts, all the time, is what it says on my Instagram account.
How fabulous. Now, I'd never heard the term intermediality. Is that the correct
Yeah,
term?
it
Intermediality?
is. It's quite
Before, but that's
new.
exactly what the topic is that we're discussing. So you are almost overqualified for this discussion. Um, I believe we discussed in advance that we wanted to give a bit of a content warning. Certain
Mm.
kinds of people might want to steer clear of this article. What kinds of people do you think should be warned of the content?
Yes, well, I think people who are concerned, who would be geared towards being vegetarians, might be quite upset because he works hard on, you mentioned synesthesia, and he works hard on being very graphic and taste and sound and so forth. But when he gets to ingredients, he also includes butchery. And I find some parts of that a little bit, um, yeah, almost
They're very
disturbing slightly. Yeah, they're quite graphic.
explicit, graphic. They're very
Yeah,
graphic, and
yeah.
so he makes. Oh dear, here's another phrase I should probably apologize for in advance. He makes no bones about describing all
Another pun.
the the gory aspects of it. So if you don't want to read
God.
that kind of thing, you might not. You might be just go
Mm.
approach the article cautiously. It
To be
also,
fair,
I have to say, the article made me hungry, just like this
yes,
conversation is already making me hungry. Um,
yes.
he seems like an interesting guy. He had a
Mm,
restaurant in Puerto Rico. He himself,
mhm,
I've done a little bit, like a very tiny amount of extra research, basically gone on
uh-huh.
his website, and he was born in Alaska and grew up in, I believe, New Mexico and Arizona. But his restaurant that he had for nearly 10 years was in Puerto Rico. So he's got lots of connections in that part of the world.
Yes,
Mm,
well, the
great.
thing that came across, I think that you've just touched on is the sense of home. And how much the sense of home is tied up with particular ingredients and their smells and their textures. And he is very good at conveying that sometimes he becomes homesick and he gets particular ingredients coming through that he mentions. Some of them are ones I was not familiar with, but if you're looking, anyone who's reading is looking for new tastes and textures and ideas, then you will definitely find more unusual things in this article.
Absolutely. And where he makes a very explicit connection between the two creative processes is near the end. And he says, what I didn't realize until later was that chef life was part of my training as a writer. I was
Mhm.
absorbing a sensory vocabulary, inventing new language. I saw flavors before I tasted them.
That's right. Well, that very much fits with the whole idea of tasting words. I thought that there is that sensory vocabulary and that it's a speaking out loud of those those words. And he's very good at that in the article. He's very clearly worked hard to make you hungry. He has worked hard on doing that so that you feel like you're standing beside him as he's cooking and making things and bringing them together and mixing them all out. And I think that's another great thing about cooking is that you often start with a well-known recipe. You start with a basic one, you add your own flavors, and I think that's a really helpful way to think about creativity and creative writing. Makes it less scary because all of us, all the time, are making a cookery book. We will have our family recipes and we keep those, and then we buy books. Almost every home, if it has any books, there's going to be cookbooks there, and they will be changed as you think, I don't like that, too much salt or a bit more sugar or a different spice, and we mix things up. And that's a lovely way to think about creativity as an approachable part of everyday life.
Absolutely. Very well said. I'm looking for a quote by a chef writer. I
Uh-huh.
believe his name is Boemo Rabal. Talked about sentences beautiful like gumdrops. It's Hrabal, Hrabal. I don't know why I can't find it. It's his most famous quote, but I'm not.
Oh, I don't
Anyway,
know.
he talks about reading sentences that are delicious like a gumdrop, and he just wants to suck on those
Oh,
beautiful
lovely.
sentences. So yeah, that's
Yes,
what I was looking
that's
for.
true. This is really key. How to Eat, written by Nigella Lawson. Game Changer came out, what, 15 years ago? The Pleasures and Principles of Good Food. But I'm going to do a quick flick through the book and you're going to see there's a total lack of pictures.
Oh, yeah.
You see that? And really, what she's done is she's written between the recipes as to where she discovered them and what they're about. And a lot of the joy of this book is the fact that you find out about the places she's traveled to and where she's been. And I think there's been a great connection over the time through people who've written about travel and written about the cooking. And also, I think older cookery books maybe have less pictures than nowadays.
What about writers who had other interesting jobs, especially artistic ones? The British novelist Beryl Bainbridge is also
Ah,
was also a painter, so that was
that's
news to
right.
me. It makes sense
Lovely.
that people dip into other
Oh,
art forms. Can you think of any other writers who've had some kind of artsy
yes.
fartsy jobs?
Yes, indeed. And I just to say in passing, again, this is part of the whole intermediality thing where we don't cut off each art form as if there's no communication between them all. The poet Frank O'Hara was a
Oh,
curator, as well as he started to develop his writing. And also in acting, Dirk Bogarde, very famous actor, and then he went on to have a second career with his novels and his multiple biography volumes, and he also wrote newspaper columns. And finally, the other one I came across was Noel Coward. He was a child professional dancer, an actor, and then, of course, moved into writing his own plays and musicals. So those were the
yes.
ones that were arts, but a lot of our writers have come from interesting and different backgrounds.
In Canada, one of our more famous writers, Timothy Findlay, was a professional actor before he became a novelist. Yep.
Mm.
Now, if we can get a little bit naughty, do you think that writers that have other artistic careers, do they typically excel more in one than the other, or should we be generous and say that they excel at all of the things that they do? Like I would say, Timothy Findlay isn't that great of a writer. May he rest
Oh.
in peace. Maybe he
Mhm.
was a better actor.
Oh, right. I think we have to take each in their own merits. Somebody who's annoyingly talented, he was pretty much omnipresent, was Jean Cocteau, the French writer. He was a poet and an artist
He
and a
was
film
definitely an
director,
artist.
made the fantastic film La Belle et la Bête, the Beauty and the Beast. So it must have been incredibly annoying to be a writer at his time because whatever you went to do, he was there already doing something amazing.
Very annoying. I also thought that this article invite us to have a chat about food in fiction. Who are some of the writers that
Mhm.
have written well about food that make us so hungry? The one that I immediately think of is this Canadian novel, Butter, Honey, Pig Bread by Francesca Ekwuyasi.
Mm.
Won all kinds of awards when it came out a couple of years ago. Francesca Ekwuyasi is originally from Lagos in Nigeria,
Mhm.
and the novel is set both in Nigeria and in Canada. And there's so much food. The food, the process of cooking the Nigerian dishes is so elaborately described that you could
Oh,
almost use it as a cookbook.
wow, that is
So that's
amazing.
that's that's one that made me very hungry.
Oh, yes. The title alone sounds amazing. Well, I've got
That's
a
right.
couple of examples here. One of my favorite writers is P.G. Wodehouse, and he tends to write about, he always has amazing breakfasts where Bertie Wooster is getting breakfast, and his gentleman's gentleman, who's Jeeves, brings it to him. Here's a quote from the start of Jeeves in the Offing. Sentence
Right.
one. How about this for your breakfast? Jeeves placed the sizzling eggs and bee on the breakfast table, and Reginald, kippered herring, and I, licking the lips, squared our elbows and got down to it. So it's that
Okay.
eggs and bee instead of eggs and bacon. He just kind of shortens it. It's quite fun. The other one is where food becomes like a major character, almost like weather is sometimes in books. And this is from Cold Comfort Farm by Stella Gibbons. And the whole book is a hilarious pastiche of a Gothic novel in which there's always sinister goings on and it's purple prose. And it's a scene in a kitchen, and it's where there's a woman cooking this porridge, and the son of the house, who's very well, he's the local kind of stud, so we just say. So this is the description of it all. A snood full of coarse porridge hung over the fire, and standing with one arm resting upon the high mantel, looking moodily down into the heaving contents of the snood, was a tall young man whose riding boots were splashed with mud to the thigh, and whose coarse linen shirt was open to his waist. The firelight lit up his diaphragm muscles as he heaved slowly in rough rhythm with the porridge. He looked up as Judith, that's his mother, entered and gave a short, defiant laugh, but said nothing. So she goes over to cook the porridge, and finally at the end, she's telling him off. Cur, coward, liar, libertine, who were you with last night? Moll at the mill, or Violet at the vicarage, or Ivy perhaps at the ironmongery? Seth, my son. Her deep, dry voice quivered, but she whipped it back, and her next words flew out at him like a lash. Do you want to break my heart? Yes, said Seth, with an elemental simplicity. The porridge boiled over.
Oh my goodness, I think I need a cigarette.
Yes, it's just taking it way over the top. And finally, a poem from one of my very favourite poetry anthologies, which is called Lifesaving Poems, edited by Anthony Wilson. And of course, a poem is short form. It's a nice way to do description. And there's one that's written that's called Avocados. It'll take about 30 seconds to read it, by Esther Morgan. Avocados. I like the way they fit the palm, their plump Buddha weight, the sly squeeze for ripeness, the clean slit of the knife, the soft suck as you twist the halves apart, the thick skin peeling easily. Naked, they're slippery as soap. I serve them for myself, sliced and fanned, on white bone china glistening with olive oil, or I fill the smooth hollow with sharp vinaigrette, scooping out the pale, buttery flesh. Every diet you've ever read strictly forbids them.
Oh my goodness. How lovely. I would like to quickly also mention Barbara Pym, who writes a lot about food in her novels, and was in her first novel, which was the first book I read by her. Her debut is called Some Tame Gazelle, and her two main characters, these middle-aged spinster sisters, they made cauliflower cheese for lunch one day, and I thought, what is that? And I Googled it, and I've been making it ever since. Although I've, just like you were saying, I've revised it. I mix it together now with broccoli and sometimes even some shrimp in there, and it makes a lovely casserole. But I got that from Barbara Pym. And then even more briefly, one of the best novels I've read this year is by an English writer named Peter Benson, and his, I think, maybe penultimate novel, The Stromness Dinner. And it is all about food because the main character, this really kind of sexy, young, 27-year-old, open-hearted guy, loves cooking. He's a foodie. And so there's a lot of cooking, and it makes me really hungry. And I really recommend The Stromness Dinner by Peter Benson as well for foodie readers.
That sounds delightful. I have a book that got away from me, which would be a fantastic one. It's just freshly published. And I was over at Charleston at the festival, and they were just they launched it, and it's called The Dinner Table, over 100 writers on food. So it's like an anthology of writers, which would be people like Salman Rushdie and other people who are mentioned food, and they've carefully put them all together in the book so that each recipe kind of leads on to the next. And it's by Ella Risbridger and Kate Young. And the only thing was, this is in England, and I would have had to bring it back by plane, and it was huge, dense, and really heavy. And I thought, I can't bring it back, but it looks very intriguing.
Well, you better put that on your Christmas wish list, Heather.
I think so.
I would like to give people a little taste of Brendan Shay Basham's debut novel. It's called Swim Home to the Vanished, and like I say, it just came out at the end of August, because it's very much sounds in some ways autobiographical, certainly the connection to cooking. The young protagonist, he's grief-stricken at the death of his brother, who may be drowned. And then he leaves the small town where he'd been working as a line cook and goes south. And he is from the Dene indigenous peoples, and then comes into a new town, and I think maybe becomes a cook there. But certainly it seems like there's quite a bit to do with cooking and grief in this novel, Swim Home to the Vanished. So I think I might like to give that a try someday. Heather, I could talk to you all day. This was wonderful. Will you come back?
Oh, yes. It's been delightful. You've made it simple and straightforward.
Thank you so much.